The church fell into tense silence, the kind that made even breathing feel like a crime. Then Pastor Graham's voice cut through it, calm but blistering, as he read a letter no one expected, a letter from the dead. Faces turned pale, gasps escaped lips, and Lorraine, once poised and untouchable, looked like the ground had vanished beneath her. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The call came on a Wednesday. Gray light pressed against the kitchen window as if the weather itself sensed something was wrong. My phone buzzed with Angela's name, and the second I answered, I knew. Her voice was raw, barely more than a whisper, like she was afraid to say the words out loud. "I'm so sorry, Claire. They've changed the guest list. You're not invited anymore." My mind snagged on that one word, uninvited. Like it was a birthday party, like my father's death had become a private affair and I'd somehow failed the dress code. I froze. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I'd misheard. "What do you mean?" I asked, but Angela's silence said everything. Then, almost mechanically, she clarified. "Lorraine said she wants it to be intimate. People who really cared about him." Something cracked deep in my chest, a slow, deliberate fracture. Lorraine. My stepmother. The woman who came into our lives when I was already grown, whose brand of sweetness had always tasted fake, who'd married my father after just 4 months of prayerful dating, then made it her mission to prune his past like it was a dead branch. And me? I was apparently the rot she'd been dying to cut away. I set the phone down and just sat there, staring at the countertop like it might offer a reason. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't crying. Not yet. My thoughts were a landslide of half-formed memories and sharp edges. Hospital visits cut short, voicemails unanswered, the way Lorraine always inserted herself between us, acting as if my father had no history before her. Daniel Watkins wasn't perfect. He was quiet, sometimes distant. But he was my dad. He taught me how to parallel park, how to change a tire, how to keep receipts even when I thought I didn't need them. When I was 9 and my mom ran out for cigarettes and never came back, he was the one who learned how to braid my hair and pack my lunches. He was the one who stayed. And now, when it was my turn to stay, to stand beside him in death, I was being erased. No text, no call, no warning. Just a second-hand exile delivered through a cousin's guilt-ridden whisper. That night, I scrolled through Facebook and there it was, a filtered photo of Lorraine in black, surrounded by lilies and sympathy comments. "Rest easy, Daniel. You were so loved." But nowhere was my name. Not even a mention of a daughter. It was like I'd never existed. The sun had started its slow descent behind the church's stone steeple, casting long, slanting shadows across the cracked pavement. Claire sat rigidly on the steps, each second stretched thin by the weight of humiliation. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, folded too neatly, like she was trying to press herself into invisibility. She could still hear Lorraine's voice echoing in her skull, sharp, cold, entitled. The murmurs of those inside hadn't died down when she exited. She'd become the morning spectacle, the cautionary tale. Yet here was Pastor Graham, descending the steps like someone stepping out of a different time, his gait slow but unwavering. The late afternoon light caught on the rims of his thick glasses as he studied her, not with judgment, but with something gentler. Sorrow, maybe, or recognition. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer empty condolences or try to fix what had already shattered. He just sat beside her, folding his knees with a soft grunt, the old wood of the stairs creaking under his weight. For a moment they said nothing. Birds chirped high in the sycamore tree that arched over the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, a car engine coughed to life, The world kept turning. Claire hadn't cried yet. She wasn't sure if it was because of pride, shock, or the iron-walled numbness that years of exclusion had taught her to build. But when the pastor reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and drew out that carefully folded sheet, its edges softened and worn like it had been touched too many times, something inside her chest tightened. "He wanted this read," Pastor Graham said, his voice measured. "But I think the words will fall hollow without you there." Claire didn't take the paper right away. She stared at it, as if it might burn her. Her father's handwriting, his thoughts preserved. A message meant for many, but maybe, just maybe, meant for her most of all. She had spent so long wondering if he had truly seen her, not just acknowledged her existence, but seen her heart, her pain, the way she still reached for connection through the smoke of their fractured past. She finally took it, fingers grazing his. The paper was heavier than she expected. The pastor stood and offered his hand. "You have every right to be there," he said, firmly this time. "Your father made sure of it." Claire stood, her legs unsteady but her spine straighter than before. The stares would still be there. The whispers would slither behind her back. But she had something they didn't. His words. His final say. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she mattered. The silence in the sanctuary was no longer sacred. It was searing. The kind that hums with tension, charged with all the things people weren't prepared to hear. Claire's footsteps echoed through it as she walked back down the aisle, the hem of her coat whispering at her ankles. No one spoke. No one dared. Pastor Graham's presence at her side was like a shield, unshakable, righteous. Lorraine, frozen in place near the front pew, opened her mouth to object, but Pastor Graham didn't give her the room. "She stays," he said, voice sharp as flint. This was Daniel's wish. A ripple moved through the congregation, half shock, half shame. Even the air shifted, as if the building itself acknowledged the boundary that had just been redrawn. Claire, once invisible in the eyes of this crowd, was now the focal point. Pastor Graham moved to the pulpit with solemn purpose, the paper in his hand quivering only slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of what it carried. A reckoning, written in the trembling hand of a man who had run out of time but not out of truth. He began to read. The name Lorraine left his lips like a stone skipping across a still lake, sharp enough to leave rings. Every head turned. Her name wasn't supposed to be there, not like that. But it was, front and center, like a courtroom summons. She flinched, as if struck. Daniel's words spared no one. They carved through the church's quiet reverence with the blunt honesty of a man unchained. What he'd once swallowed for peace now spilled out with force. He'd seen everything. The slow corrosion of his world, the suffocating grip Lorraine had wielded, and the daughter he had allowed to be erased from his life. And he named it all, publicly, deliberately. Claire didn't cry. Her body stayed still, but inside the letter cracked open something buried and bruised. This was no fragile confession. This was defiance from beyond the grave, an act of restoration. When Pastor Graham read the line, "Claire is the best thing I ever created," something shifted in the room. Guilt crystallized on familiar faces. A hush fell again, but it was different now. It wasn't the hush of exclusion. It was the stunned, shamed silence of people who had stood by, complicit. And when Daniel's voice, through the pastor, declared that this moment was his to control, that Claire belonged more than anyone, it was a benediction no one could contest. The man they'd come to mourn had just redrawn the map of truth, and Claire stood, not in the back, but exactly where she was always meant to be, Seen. Heard. Unshakably real. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to heavy ledgers and quiet reckonings. I sat at the long oak table, surrounded by dusty portraits and books no one had touched in years. A mahogany clock ticked with almost theatrical solemnity, as though it, too, were bearing witness to the end of something carefully constructed. Lorraine sat across from me, her mouth a hard line, her hands clenched in her lap. Her lawyer whispered frantically into her ear, but she didn't respond. She didn't blink. She looked like a monument built to defiance, until the will was read. The room chilled the moment Daniel's final intentions took shape in ink and voice. The bulk of his estate, the properties, the savings, the investment accounts meticulously cultivated over a lifetime, rerouted with surgical precision. Not to the wife who had curated her image with icy elegance, nor to her children who had barely spoken his name unless it earned them something. No. He had emptied his fortune like a vessel, poured it into causes that reflected the man he had once been, the man who, in the end, chose truth over appearances. Charity. A shelter. Names carved not into granite gravestones, but into the foundation of renewal for people he would never meet. And then came the final clause. Short, clear, unflinching. All remaining assets, including my vintage car collection, accounts, and investments, go to my daughter, Claire Watkins. Let no one dispute it. Not a hesitation, not a comma wasted. The room held its breath. Lorraine's chair scraped against the floor as she stood and left. No words, no rebuttal, just the quiet unraveling of someone whose control had been severed at the root. Her heels echoed down the hallway like the end of a performance that had long overstayed its welcome. As I leaned forward to sign the documents, my lawyer's voice came low, near reverent. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. And I believed him. But what filled me wasn't the satisfaction of victory or the thrill of having the last word. It wasn't revenge. That would have been too easy, too small. It was something steadier, quieter. A rare kind of peace that doesn't come from taking something back, but from knowing you were never truly gone. That despite everything, someone had remembered you with absolute clarity. He'd left me more than assets. He'd left a sentence, just one, that stitched me back into the story from which I'd been forcibly erased. She deserves to be front and center. And this time, no one dared to disagree.